My name is Mikey Mhenna. Nice to meet everybody. Nice to see so many people from all over the world on the call. Our special guest is Dr. Lisa Urkevich, who is a specialist in the heritage and the music of the Arabian Peninsula. She holds a position as general editor of the College Music Symposium Journal of College Music Society, the largest worldwide consortium of college, conservatory, and university musicians and scholars. She also serves as full professor of musicology / ethnomusicology at the American University of Kuwait, where she is the former founding division head dean of the arts and humanities and founding chair of the Department of Music and Drama. Lisa, thank you so much for joining our Afikra Conversations.
Thank you so much, Mikey, for inviting me. And kudos to you on this project, because it's really impressive. It's very nice that you're doing.
Thanks so much. We are doing it together. So I like asking all of our guests to just get a sense, how did you find yourself interested in the music of the Arabian Gulf?
Well, when I was a freshman in college, I happened to go to a college with one of the largest ethnomusicology programs around. A group of ethnomusicologists that was founded at UCLA had left there and gone to the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And since I was a student and I wanted to keep my scholarship, one of the things they said is start to play in ensembles, because I was a performer, I was a French horn player. And so through there, I got involved with playing in different kind of world music ensembles and taking courses in Arab music. There was a famous professor there that had specialized in North African music. And so I was first introduced to world musics and Arab music. I ended up with a degree in Chinese music, actually, my first bachelor's degree. So it just kind of took off from there. And then, it opened a whole world to me, beyond Western music, beyond what I had learned as a child. So, and I just wanted to learn more, and I kept keeping involved. Then moved to Saudi Arabia in the 90s. I actually went with my husband while I was writing my doctoral dissertation. I went and lived in the mountains of Taif, and then just got, the societies were very closed then, but I started to make friends and go to weddings and start to see this new type of music. So that between 94 and 98 was really my first initiation, where I really lived in the culture and was exposed to this music on such a deep level.
Your bio says that you have done two Fulbright scholarships. Was the first one the one that brought you to Saudi, or?
No, I just went. No. My first Fulbright, both Fulbrights were in Kuwait, because Saudi wouldn't let people study. They weren't on the Fulbright for music back in the day, and also a woman wanted to go to Saudi Arabia and study music wasn't really going to happen. It's one of the reasons I picked Kuwait, because culturally Kuwait is very close, at least to Riyadh. We have the same tribes in Kuwait, the same. A lot of my students will go to weddings. They could go down to Riyadh to go to weddings, or vice versa. People from Riyadh come up to Kuwait. So I wanted to study Saudi, but I couldn't get a Fulbright to Saudi. That was in 2001 or 2. So I ended up in Kuwait, which worked out really well.
Yeah. So interesting. So I want to just ask a basic question around about the introduction I just made. It says, Lisa also serves as full professor of musicology slash ethnomusicology. For those of us who are ignorant, what is the difference between musicology and ethnomusicology?
Well, it's changed over the years. Yeah. So musicology was, this big study that came out the first doctorate in music was offered during the Renaissance. So people have been studying music a long time. And if you go back to ancient Greece, they used to say, if you want to be a well-rounded man, you study gymnastics for the body and music for the mind. So music's been it's one of the 7 liberal arts. It's been around forever as a serious study. Musicology tends to mean the study of music on a kind of a humanities level, where there's a criticism. This is good, this is bad, like the way we study English literature. Shakespeare's good, Shakespeare's bad. And so we look at music compositions and we judge them on their value as a music. Ethnomusicology, especially now, it wasn't always like this. My old professors were like musicologists that study world music. But ethnomusicology now is an anthropological approach. It's a social science. So you don't go into a society and say, this is good music, this is bad music. You just kind of view it, and you're a human tape recorder like an anthropologist. And you kind of just express it and why they're doing this and so forth. A musicologist would come in and go, no, we've got to judge it within that system. And the problem is when the two get blurred, so that sometimes anthropologists, ethnomusicologists come in and are the only people that recorded songs from a community. This happened, I don't want to be too specific, but this happened in the 70s, so one of my neighboring countries here. And they recorded music, and I went back to that country later, and they wrote a book on it called The Music of This Country. And I went back there and hung out with the musicians, and can you believe this? Somebody plops a microphone down, and now this is the music of my country. And that was a terrible band. They recorded the worst bands, and now everybody in the world thinks that terrible band and those bad songs are the songs of my country. They wanted more criticism. They wanted a musicology applied to their culture. And one of my colleagues even said, why can't we have a Beethoven? Why are we only approached like gender roles and we're always approached like an anthropology? Why can't we? And so when I did my research, because I'm really trained I'm trained as both. My first degrees are ethnomusicology, but with a performance angle, and then as a historical musicologist. So when I came into this region, I thought, I'm going to take all that rigor and discipline that we learned as musicologists, where you don't leave a stone unturned, where you're really exacting, you check all your sources and apply that to this region so that people can go, hey, I have a Beethoven too. Hey, that was my goal, to apply musicology to a non-Western culture, because a lot of people think ethnomusicology is non-Western, but it's not. It's an anthropological approach to music.
That's very, very helpful. So for the purposes of today's conversation, I want to focus on these three projects for the most part, as well as your role at the American University of Kuwait and the way you think of yourself as an educator in this region. But let's start first talking about some of the work that you've done focusing on the music of Kuwait. There are two projects here. One is called Sod, and then the other one is called Kuwait Sea Songs of the Arabian Gulf. Let's talk, I guess, maybe let's stay with the biographical part a little bit. How quickly into your move to Kuwait did you decide, you know what, this is not just about going to weddings and enjoying the music. I want to actually produce academic work on this region?
Well, immediately I came as a Fulbright scholar. I was a professor at Boston University, and I came to Kuwait as a Fulbrighter. So I hit the ground. But I wanted to study Bedouin because I wanted to study the Riyadh folks, the tribe. But I ran into a friend, and he grabbed me and he said, have you heard the great sea bands of Kuwait? And I'm like, no. And he said, you got to come with me. And he grabbed me and took me to this band, the Bin Hussein Sea Band. It's not a sea. When we say sea band, what it means is it's hundreds of men that get together and sing old sea songs. So it's not a band, it's people of the community are the performers. And these groups were really popular before oil well. Every pearl diving boat, a merchant ship, had musicians on it, and the crew would sing along with the professional musicians, a handful of professional musicians. Then when oil wealth came, those units died because you don't need them, you don't need sea songs anymore. So different people in the community decided to record groups of men that had been on the boats, and then they started to become identified with a diwania or a dar, which is a meeting place. And so, and they called themselves bands, but they really weren't initially bands. So it's huge groups of men that get together every week and they sing these old traditional songs, and they're dying, right? There used to be, I don't know, probably thousands of them. And now we have maybe 10 that are left in the entire Arabian Peninsula. So 10 that had roots, these old groups. So anyway, it took me, and when you think of Arab music, you don't think of anything like that. Like big choruses. I mean, it just vibrates your whole body, hundreds of men singing together, and it's beautiful. And they're mournful songs. They're sad, but they're beautiful. They're uplifting at the same time. And so, then I went and I visited this band constantly for 2 years, and they taught me like a child. It was so wonderful. Mohammed bin Hussein, he'd sit with me and hand me a drum and teach me piece by piece. And then they'd say, oh, we're having the lunch on Friday, you've got to come wrap the fish, you know. And I'd come, I swear I spent more time with them than my own family. So, but it was a wonderful experience. And to this day, I view them as dear friends, like my brothers.
So is there a sort of, let's talk a little bit about the music part of it. How different is the music, the sort of sea music? Is that the right term? What term should I be using?
Yeah, these are sea, Bahri sea songs.
The sea songs. How different is that music from in Kuwait versus in places like Bahrain and Qatar, up and down the coast?
They're shared traditions because there were no state lines, you know.
Yeah.
It was a different time back in the day, just like the tribes, you know. So we do find same genres. You'll find like jeeb or different work songs. They all have the same work song. The rhythms are similar, the tunes are similar, but they're going to be different. The Bahraini style is definitely different than the Kuwaiti. Some people say the Kuwaiti reminds me like American country music. It's clean. You've got the men are strict. You sing it straight, you clap straight. Hawk it, it's clean hawk it. And they'll say the Bahraini style, and musicians will say you can transcribe that maybe even for orchestra because it's so clean. They keep it pure and they don't embellish a lot and add a lot of ornamentation and things. But it depends on the genre and the piece. But some people say the Bahrainis might embellish more and add more ornamentation and things. But it depends on who you're talking to. But definitely from these sister states, and in my book and even here, you know, I unite them from Kuwait. You can see on the map, I don't know, these pink areas. From Kuwait, Eastern Saudi Arabia, Qatif, Bahrain, and Qatar all share a sea song tradition. And I've been in the diwaniyas in Kuwait, the meeting places, and musicians from all these countries have been there, and they could all sing the songs together, even though they didn't rehearse or anything. They could jump right in. But I've also been there when some musicians from the Emirates have been there, and they don't know the songs. Then Rami didn't know the song.
So here's a question. If there are sort of rhythmic patterns and lyrical ornaments and sort of melodic ornaments that dictate the genre, has any of it trickled into popular music the way maybe, work songs from the African American slave sort of experience found its way into the blues, which found its way into rhythm and blues and popular music in those ways? Is there any evidence of that or any sort of DNA?
1,000%. When Khaliji pop music was being invented in the late 60s and early 70s. So this is an oral tradition, and this is folk music, and it's performed by the community. It's an oral tradition. When you add technology in any culture, in the United States or anywhere, like recording techniques, the radio, a microphone, you shift. We did a huge shift in the United States. The whole nature of that music, from singing without a microphone to with a microphone, that's the end of opera, right? You don't need a microphone. With people saying classical opera like that because they don't like, they have to fill that hall. So it impacts the art and the culture. Well, in the Gulf region, when the oil wealth came, they were able to have radio stations, TV stations, and all these kind of things, and the death of these groups. So with that, and Kuwait was going through a movement where they wanted to be modern, right? In the 70s, and Egypt was super cool with Kulthum and everything going on in Egypt. So Egypt kind of provides that model for the peninsula in the 70s. And what they decide to do is come up with their own national music, but be modern. So how do you do that? Number one, you keep the rhythms. You take the rhythms from the peninsula, the Gulf, and you keep the dialect, the Khaliji dialect. And to this day, if North Africans want to sing songs from, want to get into this market, they have to add that little dialect. In the old days, in the 70s and 80s, it was very specific, a Saudi and Najdi dialect, different than a Kuwaiti and a Bahraini and so forth. Now it's starting to blur, and they're calling it white language because they're trying to hit the market. They don't want that song to be too Kuwaiti or too Saudi. So they take out words, shlonek or whatever, they're not going to include 2 words that are too specific to Kuwait.
Provincial, yeah.
Yeah, so that they can have a bigger market. It's kind of bad in the sense it waters it down. Now, the heavens, you listen to Khaliji pop and there's Latino rhythms and there's, a lot of stuff has gone by the wayside, but for the longest time, there were two things. You got to kind of keep our rhythms, because the rhythms are really fascinating in the peninsula, and the dialect.
In terms of just like, for the musicians on the call, what are the time signatures? I mean, are they completely different? Each song are they polyrhythmic? Like, how should we think about this stuff?
Yeah, it's not really the meter so much, it's the polyrhythm. It's the polyrhythm that really gives this music its punch. And even in Egypt, Egypt has the fantastic musicians in the 70s and 80s, famous Gulf people would record in Egypt, and they say, bring the drummers though. We can play everything else, but bring the drummers from the dosari, or the drummers you have from the peninsula, because of those polyrhythms. Polyrhythm, so it feels as if one person's in duple and the other one is in triple, and the beat bounces. It comes from Africa. A lot of African slaves are in the region long ago, and they no doubt help color the sounds and so forth. Not to say a lot of this isn't indigenous, because it is, but yeah. So it's better to think of it as that polyrhythm, even as something you think is simple, like Arda, the folk sword dance in Saudi Arabia, has those polyrhythms that make it jump and make it kind of really interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if at the end of this discussion, before we switch into the quick Q&A, I'm going to pull up some of the clips from the SoundCloud. But let's go into talking about your book that came out in 2015, Music and Traditions of the Arabian Peninsula. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar is the name. And for the people listening who can't see the screen, I was struck by the structure of the book, right? There's two parts to it. The first is the Najd and the Upper Gulf region. The second is the Hijaz and the Southwest Gulf region. So I'd like to talk about the structure of the book. But before I do, in the introduction of the book, you say that you were not seeking to write an academic research that concentrates on processes and values with Western anthropological perspective, rather to introduce Arabian Peninsula music, arts, and locate them in a historical and social context. Why make that distinction? What did you mean by that? How did that sort of guide your process? Yeah, it seemed quite intentional. Why?
That's a great question, because my book's peer reviewed, right? So I had to go out to a lot of scholars, and because it's non-Western, it went to ethnomusicologists. And ethnomusicologists are like, why aren't you talking about, social structure and gender roles? And I thought, because I wrote it, because this book was from handouts I would give my students in class. I would do my field work and I write things up and then go back and hand them to my class. And which was great, because not only was I constantly peer reviewed by the musicians I was with, but the students would take the work back to grandma and say, my professor said this. And grandma would say, that's not right. Grandma's from the tribes. And sometimes grandma's wrong. She just, because we would talk about it, they'd come in. I'd have parents in the class, everything. But sometimes grandma was right. So it tightened up my research and my writing a great deal. So this started as handouts. And because ethnomusicologists are reading it and asking why I'm taking this approach, I thought, because it's not for the Western ethnomusicology, it's for the people in front of me. It's for the people that grab me and say, please, we know it's dying. We know it's gone, and to have a value system. I want you kids to know learn the best songs that there are, because we don't have much time, we can't put every song in the world in there. Let's try to find the gems, or people in the community feel are gems and things like this. So have a musicological approach to a non-Western music. That was the goal.
Very cool. This is something that we started talking about earlier, but I think it's worth jumping into. Again, this map I just grabbed from online. It is from Columbia, a Columbia website, basically showing the broad areas of what we now call the Arabian Gulf. And what's interesting about your book, and I'm curious if this was a revelation to you, was how many sort of different provincial styles there were, and the dichotomies, the Bedou style versus the urban style, the seafaring versus non-seafaring. How quickly did you realize these differences? Is it so obvious that every one of your students notices it, or is this like a revelation?
Well, sometimes some things are obvious, but it was really, really difficult. And it's why it took me so long. You know, it really took 20 years of research, because also the same terms are used and they mean different things in a different region. And you're like, wait, that's a Samri and that's a Samri. And then wait, Samri's also means a party, and Samri also is a dance. And so it was so confusing and so difficult. And it just took a long time talking to all these great musicians and all these great informants to try to make sense and distill all this data. First, if you could find it, because, you know, music was haram, music is sinful, 94, 98, you weren't really allowed to talk about it. Professional musicians were arrested. In the middle of wedding parties, they would come in and take them away. You just hear scuffling, you know, because men would play in the other room and pipe the music in, men would be on the org. You hear scuffling while they're arrested and taken away. Yeah, so it's really, really difficult. But some things were clear right away when you would hear them, especially because I'm a musician, I was trained, and I would hear, oh, holy cow, over in Jeddah, you're playing the same rhythm I just heard in Riyadh, that tradition, and there's a connection there. So sometimes it was clear as day, you know, and then you could see dance steps that you're like, okay, you're along a Hajj travel routes, and along that Hajj travel route, even though they're far away, one's in the Najd, one's in the Hijaz, we're seeing similar dance moves. Like people they stopped over hundreds of years. And also this region's so old. I mean, it's been inhabited, second only to Africa, have humans been in that area. And we have rock art where we can see 10,000, 20,000 years ago, people doing similar dance steps to today, similar drums to today. So it's been consistent. Certain things have been consistent, which is just really remarkable. And it breaks my heart. But, you know, there's instrument like the Simsimiya from the Red Sea area, at least 8,000 years, maybe longer. That instrument's been around. It's dying in front of us. It's dying right in front of our eyes. But it survived 8,000 years because of technology, these disruptions. Now with COVID, it's a whole nother disruption. It's impacting the music world. So, you know.
Yeah. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about some of you just alluded to this now. A lot of your work focuses on dance as well, which was, you know, revelatory. For me, I don't think of it's out of ignorance. When I think of music from the Khadij, I think of, you know, I think of pearl diving music. I don't think of there being accompanying dance moves, or not dance moves, but dances. Again, just thinking about you as an educator, is this, are all of your sort of students who are young now, do they think of it, is dance a big part of the experience for them as well?
Yeah, and we always put the two together in classes. The thing is, it's just like Latin music, the cha-cha, the rumba, those are music genres, but they're dances, the tango, there's a body movement that goes with those rhythmic modes and those genres. So this is just very similar to that, you know, or American country, a hoedown or a square dance. There's different types of square dances, and that music accompanies that. So there's body movement, lots of body movement, and these are folk arts. Not all the music I discuss is folk art. Some music is urban music. You play oud, and it's different. If it's an urban music, you often won't get a dance. A folk art, and folk arts all over, dubka, you know, whatever. You're going to have this body movement. So yeah, people get up and they dance. It's part of their community. They'll sing traditionally they would sing the songs themselves, and it's a way to unite them. It's a method of brotherhood, solidarity, companionship. It's just a beautiful thing that communities were doing to just show their brotherhood, their sisterhood.
Yeah. How much is this, so the two parts of the book, just to restate, there's a north, east, and southwest sort of groupings. What about this is, again, a basic question, what about the other two parts of the other two quadrants? What's going on in those places?
Okay, well, the music is kind of, the communities, the cultures, the music is kind of based on geographic limitations or locations, because Bedouin traveled and let's take the Nejd. The tribes from the Central Arabia were wandering around with camels and looking for water during different seasons and so forth. So those folks could travel to the Gulf states and they could get in but when you got down near the empty quarter, there's not much room to get into the Emirates. It's one of the reasons that we don't see a similar cultural traditions in the Emirates that you'll find in the upper Gulf states, because tribes just didn't migrate into there to the same extent that they did to the other regions. So certain names of tribes you'll find more to the Central Arabia and the East. Yeah. And then when you get a little northern, like tribes, and we have gone back thousands of years, but like, for instance, northern tribes play instruments like a rababa. Traditionally, southern tribes don't play rababa. It's not part of it's like a fiddle. Actually, I think there's one behind me on the wall. I mean, next to the flower, there's a rababa. It's a single string violin. So that's true. So that's also another thing to consider, and then the biggest division you're going to find with music and culture are those Hijaz mountain chains. There's a huge mountain chain that runs from Jordan, down to the Yemen. And because physically it was hard to cross, and if you're a Bedouin tribe, there was no reason for you to take camels over there all the time unless you were going to trade or something like that. So we do see that the music in the Hijaz and the Janubi, along the coast there, has many more similarities than you have across the mountains. Later, when radio is invented, radio stations from Kuwait and the Nejd, the radio waves could get back and forth between those regions, but they didn't cross the mountains. So even up until the 70s and 80s, you still kind of had this distinguishing mark, this physical land barrier. And then when you get south of Taya, that's when you start to get Janubi. The music's a little different there, south of Taya than it is north of Taya.
Interesting. Okay, cool. The other last thing I want to talk about is there's a really great lecture that you've given on YouTube about the music and dance in Mecca, which was really, really surprising to me. What is unique about the stuff that's coming out of, or that came out of Mecca?
That's a fascinating music. It's called Dana. And that's been part of the Hijaz for, oh, heaven knows, I'm sure thousands of years, because we know at least, way into the 1800s. And there's sources that indicate long before that. It's an urban music, because these are cities, these are big cities. So it's not going to be like the folk group, let's all link arms and sing these folk songs or folk dances that you get in more rural communities. But, Mecca was the musical center of the Arab world, for a long time. Like, people think of Baghdad or Cairo, but even before that, we have early sources from the Middle Ages discussing Mecca, the great Mecca musicians. So this is an urban music. And when I say urban music, it means it uses oud and maqamat, as opposed to some folk music. We normally don't identify it like that because the impetus, the musical range, is so narrow that it doesn't have that level of musical complexity that you get in city centers and urban centers. But the arts that come out of Mecca, and there are many different rhythmic modes for different types of these Dana songs. It's a category. Women sing them, men sing them.
Yeah. Can I play one of them from the video?
Yeah, I'm sure. If I had one up there, sure.
Yeah, I think I have one queued up. Let me see if it's still up there. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Here we go. Let's see if. All right, this will show up in a second. In the meantime, let's listen to some of the SoundCloud recordings that I highly encourage folks to check out those recordings. So these are 5 of the or 4 of the references that you have in your book. So walk us through what these are, just so we're going to listen to a little bit of them. But
the kutwa, I don't know if you start with kutwa. Kutwa step. It's a step dance they do in the Asir in the southwest of Saudi Arabia, and every tribe and every region has their own little take on it. It's like you're really proud of it. Certain people are proud of a certain dish they make, and our region does it. And it's a line dance with a really interesting step. And I recorded this at a women's wedding party, just to get a live recording of it. It was the singer's name was Aisha. We never wanted to put names because in those days, or when I made the recordings, these people, a young woman that's singing publicly, it might embarrass her family later and things like that. But yeah, so this is the music Kotwa, and during this, the women were out dancing it in 2 lines. It's almost like a little competition. Anytime you have anything related to tribes or the Bedouin, you'll tend to have these 2 lines and they compete. Our line's better than your line,
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun. It's a good spirited.
Okay, here we go. So it was a problem with my sharing. So let me play a little bit of this, and then we will go into the questions. Can you hear that? So that's defined by the rhythmic pattern and the sort of the venue, right?
Yeah, the rhythmic mode. It can be inside, outside. Yeah.
Okay. And where's that from? Like what part of
the Southwest, the Asir. It was near Abha. I was near Abha. I used to live down there. I lived down there too in Khamis Mashay years ago.
Just out of curiosity, how many recordings are there of this type of stuff? Of like khutwa in particular? Are there tons of them?
Well, everybody makes cassettes. Like, this is my band, and you want to hire me for your wedding? Here's my cassette. Oh, there's just floating around everywhere. And then even today. Yeah.
Okay, let's listen to this one. Is this okay to listen to this one?
Yeah, it should be Dosari, south of Riyadh.
Okay, let's listen to it. Yeah, it sounds so African compared to. It's so funny comparing it to music that in Syria and Iraq. It's totally different.
Because Wadi Tawasser had a lot of palm groves, so they had a lot of African slaves there, and it's the heart of drumming in the Najd.
Yeah.
And that rhythmic mode, you find it everywhere. In the Hijaz, they call it Kuwaiti. It's similar to a rhythmic mode called Kuwaiti. And like Dalkis has a big song a few years out called Dag Kuwaiti, the Kuwaiti rhythm. And one thing, whenever you hear that rhythm, you'll see arms come. The men dance with, or even women with their arms. Every time I hear Dosari, I tell my students, get your Dosari arms out. It's a fun way of dancing. That's why the picture of the little boy with his arms.
He has his arms out. Okay, let's listen to this one, and then we're going to move on. Between these two, which one should we listen to next?
Best is Iraq and Bahrain. Yeah, it's okay. It's got Iraqi roots, but yeah.
Okay. So if you were to hear that without seeing the clip, do you immediately recognize that as being Bahraini?
No, I don't, because Best is kind of it's not as prevalent. It's a prevalent music that I dealt with every day. And in Iraq, they have these huge suites, and at the end they have a piece called Pesta. And it just means a lighthearted, refrain song. And it got immigrated to Bahrain, and to Kuwait, we do it a little bit, and altered a little bit. But it's not like one of the main genres. So I would have to, but sea songs, yes. Like a work song between Bahrain and Kuwait, yes. But that's,
okay, cool. Okay, there are questions in the chat, so we're going to do this quick Q&A just to transition, and then we will open it up to the chat. And we have 3 questions so far. If there are any other ones, please add them in too. Okay, the first one, what are you reading or watching right now?
You know, I'm reading a book, sort of audio book, Blood and Oil. It's about, I'm not sure I recommend it. It's, you know, some reporters talk to consultants and others who were working on Vision 2030 with the Saudis. And it's, I think I'm finding it a little bit biased, so I guess I should, because the subtitle is like, you know, the quest for power or something like this. But, and I worked for the Saudi government, you know, for over a year, and I wanted to see the perspective of their perspective versus my own perspective. And so it's kind of interesting, but I'm not sure I recommend it.
Okay. Next is, who would you love to shadow for a day, past or present?
Well, normally somebody that's, you know, maneuvering through life pretty well and been successful. But now that we've had this massive disruption with COVID, I'm not sure it's only been a year, who's going to be successful and how it's going to come out on the other end, you know? So it's like we're starting at 0. So if I had to choose anybody, I would just choose, you know, the Prophet, Muhammad, Jesus, you know, let me follow them for a day. And let's see if we kept any of the main ideas and survived all that time. So somebody that had an impact for so many thousands of years, you know, I think I'd grab that person.
Yeah, can't go wrong. Okay, what do people most misunderstand about your work?
A lot of people think it's easier than it is. It's easier to do than it is. And I'll have grad students come down and say, I'm just going to go in there, or local folks, and they end up getting frustrated and giving up. And so I just, you know, one reason I wrote my book was to make a foundation, take that material and go deeper. If you look at the United States, we have 1,800 schools of colleges of music, higher institutions, and each one of them has a music library, and there's shelves and shelves on Beethoven and Mozart. And here we have nothing on the shelves, you know, when we're talking about some of this peninsula music. There's not enough research and books. So don't give up, start slow, and my advice is to check your sources. You'll be at an event and you'll be doing fieldwork, and the guy next to you tell you one thing, they'll tell you that's a Samari and it's not, it's a Kamari. So check, because people give you misinformation. But it's not just in this region. The other day, my student, I said, put up a song that you really like that represents you online. And the kid wrote, I really love this song by Bob Marley. He puts a YouTube video. And I listened and I said, that's not Bob Marley, that's Bobby McFerrin. But the YouTube video says Bob Marley and a picture of Bob Marley. And so now this young man and all his people all over the world think that song's by Bob Marley. So the misinformation on the internet, just on the basic level, is really disturbing. And in the peninsula, when you get to peninsula arts, another student, she said, I read a great article about this old Kuwaiti song, and the words are by a poet from the Middle Ages. And it's in this article. And so I'm going to do my project on it. And I said, fine. She went to the National Museum, dug deep, and said, that reporter's wrong. That song wasn't written by that poet. But so the information in the newspaper is wrong. And that just taught a whole community of people. It took a student to go spend, 3 days in a library to dig it up to get the truth. So I just, the point is that this work is hard, and that don't give up, but you have to give effort to find the real truth.
In the timeless words of Bob Marley, don't worry, be happy, just work.
That's the song, you've seen this.
Okay, whose work do you admire or are inspired by?
There's a Saudi anthropologist, Saad Al-Suwayan. He's elderly now, and he's way ahead of his time. He went to, I think, USC in the 70s and came and did all kind of field work, anthropological field work. And he was from Qasim, with a really religiously strict place north of Riyadh, and did all kind of field recordings and wrote really interesting books. And I feel bad for him, because now people are starting to be interested in him, but his health is ailing and he's getting older. But what he did, he really deserves a lot of credit. Well ahead of his time.
Fantastic. Okay, we have 4 questions in the chat. We're going to start with Zaina.
Hi, thank you so much for such a great presentation. My question is, to what extent did being a female limit your access to these male-dominated spaces? And could you also say that as a foreigner, you had more access than Arab women?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Absolutely. In fact, back in the 90s, they would say, I could go to the women's side of the house. The houses were divided like in Saudi. I could go on the women's side of the house, hang out with the women, and then get up and go over to the men's side of the house. Because they said, well, you're in Westerns. You're not really like a woman like our women. You're kind of like different. So there's no way a man could have gone into these women events that I went into in Saudi or Kuwait or a lot of these regions. So being a woman certainly helped me with studying women's music, and being foreign, being American, because I'm not part of the tribes. I don't have to worry about my, reputation or anything like this. It allowed me to go in with the room with men, and the men would say, I say, why are you guys letting me in here? They go, because we think it's interesting, and also we want to record our heritage. So it helped me a great deal. And while a person from the region would have encountered many more difficulties, even people that want to, if a Kuwaiti wants to go into Bahrain, they're like, what are you doing? Why are you down here? What are you doing? A little suspicious, but if because I'm an American, I'm so far away. It's so weird. I would meet Bedouin tribes. Like I remember down there, the empty quarter, just stopping people that live in tents, no really poor people that have nothing. And the women had never seen anybody that looks like me, and the children would touch me and stuff. And they'd say, where are you from? And I'd say, America. And they'd never heard of it. So they go, you Syrian? You must be Syrian. And after a while, I was like, yeah, I'm from Syria. It's all good. It's as wacky as you're going to get as Syria, so I'll take it.
Yeah, you should have had the nickname Lisa Shamiya.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, next. That's a great question, Zaina. Thanks so much. Neil, you're up next.
Thank you. Hi. Hello, Lisa. This is Neil van der Linden from Amsterdam. We met before. I reviewed your book, by the way, for the National, as you might remember. I have a question about, as you say, so few groups remain. I assume that everybody knows about Ghana and Morocco on the other side of the Arab world, where through, partly because of the success with tourists, but also through fusion, serious fusion with Pharaoh Sanders, Marcus Miller, Omar Sosa, etc., centered partly around the festival of Essaouira, Gnawa is able to survive. Is that something which could be performed with the Khaliji music as well, or would it, on the other side, also endanger the nature of the music? Would you have an idea if such a thing would be feasible?
Hi, Neil. First, great to see you. Of course, I remember you.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, thank you.
Lovely to see you, and you look like you're doing well. Yeah. Yeah, you know what? No, I just don't know much about Moroccan music or the whole situation. But I mean, they are trying to keep groups alive, but they're creating new ones. I just meant the ones you could trace their ancestors back to the boats. But there are new groups who have members who don't really come from the old pro-writing traditions, and they are still singing songs. There's a new band in Kuwait, the Mass Band. That's a C band, but I don't consider them part of that old 10, the Big 10. But yeah, there are some things, but it's not. I'm a little disappointed. It hasn't picked up to the extent I would have hoped. In the Gulf, and because Kuwait really loves music. Kuwait is a government's always been kind of supportive of the arts, but I don't know. And I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer.
No, for instance, Bill Braggan, who's also online, might be able to tell you that recently at New York University, they did a fusion with a Kuwaiti musician, a South African musician, and it worked very well. That could be a path. People would be worried that by fusion you corrupt the authenticity of the music, but on the other hand, like it was proven in Essaouira, it can also help foreign interest from serious musicians, can help local musicians to get more self-conscious, self-awareness, what's called self-confidence, which might create new ways, but also helps the old ways to survive and get an international interest.
This is true. In a few years, at the university, we worked with the British Council, and they brought in Scottish or Irish folk band, and we put them together with Kuwaiti musicians, and they created some kind of a fusion sound. We had a CD called The Flavors of Sound, and it was really interesting. And it really, to mix these two types of music, because he had 6/8 rhythms coming from this Scotch Irish sound to this. But then I was sitting in the audience, and they did a famous song called Bushia, a famous Kuwaiti Sami song. And I'm in the audience with some older Kuwaiti women, and they were like, ruin this song.
Right.
They don't like it. But,
Okay.
or that essence, that je ne sais quoi,
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
Yeah,
Thank you. Peter's up next.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for doing this talk. My question was originally about the harmonic structures within some of this music, but I actually want to change and ask a little bit about the industry and like the economic structures that exist in Kuwait and other nations that support this music and the dissemination nationally and outside of the countries.
Well, there's different types of music, right? So we have art music, kind of sophisticated music like the soul. We have the folk songs, and you have this Musicology pop. What's going on with the industry? Wow, it's the same thing in the Western world now. With there's no live performances, right? And the music schools are kind of shut down, and so I don't know what's going to happen with the industry into the future. In the popular commercial music of the region, you've got kids in their bedrooms, right, laying tracks, just like you do anywhere else. Part of the problem is this, the software is tonal, it's not microtonal, and even if it weren't, they wouldn't. Some of the young people engaged in it would reject it anyway. I mean, certain organizations, NBC is doing well. They're finding ways. Yeah, but what's going to happen with the industry, whether it's in Saudi Arabia or the Gulf states, I don't know. I mean, I know the Saudis really wanted to succeed, but they're so detached from that old heritage because it's not taught in the schools. So what's going to come out, it might just be like a Western, I remember somebody said to me, hey, maybe we can have K-pop. And then, which maybe they can, but you kind of get really far away from what's unique about the region. Right? So I'm sorry, I can't speak more about the market and the industry because I really don't know what's going to come forward in the future.
Okay, thanks, Peter. We have a question from May, but just to tag on to that, Lisa, I'm curious, are your students mostly musicians? Are they folks who are interested in playing this music as well? Do they have GarageBand open and they're sampling it and are trying to make, bachata style music for Kuwait, like modern, the same way bachata was a folk genre and now it's very much a pop genre?
Well, we're a liberal arts college, so we teach all different types of students, and some are serious and they want to go forward. We've had students go on to graduate school and become professors themselves, but we don't have a major because of the nature of the region. It's complicated. But so I teach a variety of students, but I teach upper level. So normally to get into my class, you have to kind of pass an interview. You have to have a basic knowledge. So some people want to go into, a lot of people are common media, and they want to use traditional music in their products later in their life. And so there's a great variety, a lot of business majors, and some are really serious musicians. So it just depends.
Great. Okay, we have 3 questions. We're going to try to get through all of them. May, Mustafa, and Bill. May?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for this presentation. I really enjoyed it. My question actually starts with a quote by Nina Simone. She once said that an artist's duty is to reflect the times. So I just wanted to see, what do you think of this quote? And do you think it's relevant to your profession as a musicologist? Thank you.
Absolutely, and that's great. It should reflect the times, but I'm also a historian. And see, if you want to take a music like in America, in Appalachia or something, and make it modern and reflect the times, it's been around so long. It's been recorded, it's been documented, people have written about it. You can come and take, there's also the issue of national identity, and to say that Saudi doesn't have a national identity tied to its music, I don't know. It does. It does. And then sometimes people know this music, but they just don't know how to talk about it or identify it. So yes, the art should reflect the times. And so but there's also this concept of globalization is really colonization. And so a big, powerful country with a big market can crush a country that hasn't developed or saved its own heritage yet. And that's probably my biggest concern, that this is, it's not like, oh, we're all God's children, let's just share. It's like big mammoth capitalism might come and smush little baby heritage that hasn't been studied yet.
Thanks, May. Mustafa?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My question was, I mean, how often are people surprised to learn about the heterogeneity in the Arabian Peninsula? I mean, I grew up in Jeddah, and since I moved to the States, I always noticed people like just grouping all the peninsula in at one, you know, and knowing like there's a lot of, you know, heterogeneity within the region.
I'm sorry, Mustafa, knowing that there's a lot of what? What was the word?
Heterogeneity, like a lot of different groups and different, you know, traditions in music.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia is huge. The Arabian Peninsula is huge. It's right, one third the size of the United States. It's like from the Mississippi West, and there's a lot of different peoples. And you know, we always say people live in boxes. Sometimes they don't know about each other, what this tribe is doing and that group is doing. Yeah, so I think that is one thing that people will say, or even my students or anybody I encounter, like, wow, I didn't understand. It was so diverse and so different. And it's one thing that's kind of good about, you know, being American. I remember working with the ministry and stuff and saying, you know, people in Texas are not like people in New York. You know, they're all from the same. You got to kind of, it's good to respect these differences, but also unite as a country. But definitely respect. Don't, if you start forcing New York on Texas, it's not going to work, or vice versa. You know.
Absolutely. Okay. Bill, you want to take us away?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mikey, and thank you, Lisa, for the presentation. I'm curious just about definitions. I know the one of the recordings that you showed early in the presentation spoke about art song of the sea, and you just recently made a reference to art song. And I'm just wondering within this context, because so much of the music is functional, and I've got, I guess, a very sort of Western idea of sort of art song referring to a certain kind of rarefied classical music that is non-functional. So I'm just curious, what does that mean for you as you're using that term? What kind of, how does that fit into this specific context?
Great question. Exactly what you said. It's not functional. It's music for music's sake. It's performed in a diwania at a private gathering, like Sot is in Kuwait. It tends to use oud or something where you have to learn to play makam, an instrument that can play melodic tones, as opposed to almost everything else. Like a great deal of the other music, the folk music, is just drums or hand claps. But when you start to bring in that melodic instrument, and then there are not dances associated with most of the genres that identify as, or I categorize as art songs. So it's music for music's sake. And even those Dana songs, you know, they don't have specific dances that go with them.
Okay. Well, we just crossed the hour, and we had some great questions. Lisa, thank you so much for doing this. For those of you who are interested in engaging with Lisa's work, you can find her website online. And I highly recommend going to the SoundCloud, checking out some of the recordings, going to the website. You can see these two really beautiful booklets that accompany the two projects related to Kuwait. And you can check out the book online. A lot of really, really good stuff. If you saw the link in the chat about feedback, please give us feedback on today's event. If you'd like to support our work and keep us going and growing, go to patreon.com/afikra and support our work there. And check out our upcoming events. We have a really, really good event this Saturday. It's our first event featuring high school students. 4 really adorably nerdy students from the American School of Palestine are going to be giving community presentations in Ramallah. It's going to be really, really good. So check that out. And Lisa, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mikey. Really appreciate it.
Okay, everybody, have a good day or night wherever you are.